Hello, my name is Jim Emery, and as I begin this talk today on how management consulting firms need to reimagine their human capital investments, I just want to let everyone know that I'll be answering your questions during the last 10 minutes of this session. So please put your questions in the comments section as I walk through this talk. Is a little further introduction of myself. Like everyone, my path in life has been shaped by the people, the places, the experiences that I've encountered and chosen. To briefly summarize, I'm going to focus just on educational and professional experiences in these comments. I started out my undergraduate studies as an engineer, where I participated in cooperative education. And you'll hear a theme of experiential learning as I do this introduction. Then I worked for General Electric for 5 years, and I came to Fuqua initially for an MBA. After that, I spent 6 years in management consulting before returning to Fuqua for my PhD studies. And at this point in my career now, I am faculty co-director in our team-based consulting practicum. And so my talk today is really an outgrowth of our felt need to revisit the training that we provide to our students, which focuses on using consulting tools and methodologies to help organizations address business challenges. And so to prepare for today, I conducted some primary and secondary research, which of course includes AI in our current environment. And in the end, the story that I'm going to share comes down to recognizing that management consulting is an industry in which human capital is the primary asset being used to sell and deliver the services that are provided to clients through a variety of types of engagements. Management consultants add value through insight drawn from spanning boundaries of organizations, industries, and even countries, the application of structured processes and frameworks, and addressing capacity constraints that enable clients to perform more effectively in their environmental niches. Of course, the world is changing for clients and therefore also for consultants. And this is not just a technology change story, even though, of course, that is a big issue on everyone's mind today. There is also economic uncertainty as well as regional and ideological conflict. So, wars and rumors of wars. And while these changes aren't unique to this point in history, the pace of change, I would argue, is accelerating. And to respond, consulting firms need to continue to increase the precision with which they recruit and train human capital, their ability to manage change, not just for their clients, but within their own organizations, is also going to be a critical success factor. And additionally, in light of the accelerating pace of change and the competition for certain scarce resources, consulting firms will also need to develop or expand effective collaboration models with other organizations. So, to elaborate on these critical success factors for human capital management, I do a lot of my work in healthcare. So, the language that I'm using here borrows from the idea of precision medicine. But the story is pretty straightforward. Economic pressure on clients, combined with clients having a better understanding of the consulting model, as well as their own perceptions or expectations for how AI will enhance consulting capabilities, are leading to a shift in projects that clients are seeking help for. It's also raising the bar on the expectations that they have for what consultants are going to deliver. So they still want expert insights, but they don't want to pay newly minted college graduates to produce PowerPoint decks. They want help with developing new solutions and implementation. And of course, as I said, clients are undergoing significant change, including how to adopt AI within their own organizations. So they want help with managing change as well. So when I ask senior consulting leaders across different firms, what does this mean for the skills that consultants need now and moving forward? An almost universal answer was that now consultants need to be bilingual. That was one term that one of the folks I interviewed used, but I I liked it, and it really captures this idea that consultants now need to be able to communicate effectively with both technical people and with business people. Now, that probably seems pretty intuitive since almost every business of any scale today operates on a technology backbone. So, while business consultants don't need to know programming per se, they do need to understand technology sufficiently to be able to help their clients understand how to use technology in support of business activities. The other thing I heard was the ongoing emphasis on the importance of soft skills. And the one soft skill that I heard universally was the importance of flexibility or agility, which is something that we discuss frequently in my program in the context of helping students really become comfortable dealing with ambiguity. And now I've also noted several other important soft skills on this page that senior consultants and partners emphasize, but in some sense, these other skills aren't really new. However, the comments that I heard, at least some of those comments, really suggest that the gaps in those skills for new graduates have increased. And these skill gaps may also reflect differences in the backgrounds of the people that are now being hired into management consulting firms. So, building on that, one other interesting observation that I'm going to point out is that these changes are leading to changes in firm structure. So, they're moving consulting firms from a traditional pyramid model where they had many hires coming in from common backgrounds at entry level positions. Think folks out of economics or business undergraduate programs into analyst roles, folks out of MBA programs into consulting roles. But now they're hiring graduates with technical backgrounds, including engineers, data scientists, and PhDs. And these people are going into different units within the firm, which don't generally follow the traditional consulting career path with its heavy emphasis on selling as you move up within the firm. So, consulting companies are also supplementing their ranks at higher levels with lateral hires that come out of industry or other consulting firms. Even with these changes in firm structure, recruiting still has to meet multiple goals that are important for the firm as it brings in new talent. So they have to select talent and have mechanisms for professionals to build internal connections. And those internal connections are really critical to the success of the individual in the firm. And that includes things like getting staffed on projects and having mentors within the firm. So this highlights the importance of networking, which was identified as an important soft skill for consultants. But as firm structures change, that's going to have implications for natural networking opportunities. And the more successful firms, I believe, will rethink their processes for encouraging networking. Of course, aligning talent with target client composition, that is, who are we serving and what are their needs, where are they located, their cultural background, their functional background, those kinds of differences. We need to align talent within the consulting firm to match that. That's not new. And of course, enhancing the firm's reputation. Those are going to remain important considerations as firms modify their structures and recruit through different talent pipelines. By the way, I should add on my visual at the base of the firm now, not as broad. We don't have that large base of the pyramid, but we're supplementing capabilities now with AI. The takeaway from all of this is that winning firms will need even greater precision in hiring from these different backgrounds into different levels within the firm. So, to my second point about precision skill development and how important that is. Now, training has always been an important activity for management consulting firms. Let me be clear about that. However, in light of the changes that I've mentioned for professional recruiting, and given the importance of a consultant's ability to effectively engage with a variety of stakeholders, it follows that consulting firms have a significant training and development challenge. So here I'm using an admittedly imperfect metaphor of the Rubik's Cube to characterize this challenge of aligning different training modalities to support skill development by position, and doing that in a way that's responsive to the needs of the different stakeholder groups that each of these individuals is going to interact with. And so the effort to configure training to these different parameters immediately leads to the realization that the processes involved in recruiting, training, and evaluation are integrally related. So you can't think of these as performing these as separate activities, independent of each other. Now that we have multi-channel recruiting, new client expectations, work that requires relationships with different business partners or vendors, and skill gaps that vary across the organization, we need a training and development program that begins sooner, potentially even before professional staff are hired, and is managed across that person's career. But training isn't particularly effective, and by the way, neither is recruiting, if we don't have well-developed processes for evaluating both past performance and an employee's future potential. The better consulting firms recognize that these processes also need to be integrated with a view towards how client needs are shifting. Oh, and I think I have already mentioned at least once before this problem or this challenge of the accelerating pace of change and how that's affecting all of this. And so this leads to my third point, conclusion, which is, and again, maybe this hopefully by now will seem intuitive, but that the management consulting winners are going to be those who not only help their clients manage change, but that also manage change within their own organizations. And this is going to require building buy-in at every level. So enhancing technical skills, by the way, isn't just for junior professionals. And in today's multicultural consulting firm with new business units, the people challenge will only be addressed by engaging leaders at all levels of the firm. So again, I should be clear, I want to be clear in this, the larger brand name consulting firms, folks that I spoke with, they do have good capabilities in these areas. But the challenge that I see for these organizations is, will the right personnel be deployed to support a ruthless focus? That was a comment from one of the folks I spoke with on the change process. It's a critical part of managing change. Will consulting firms have that ability to deploy the right resources from within their firm to have that focus within their organization? And keep in mind that these resources have sales or billable hour targets to meet. And so now we're going to be asking them to do something else. How are we going to incorporate that? And so this takes us back to the whole performance evaluation and recruiting and training and development cycle. So these things all tie together. Additionally, the consultants I spoke with emphasized the value of AI in supporting people, but not replacing them. Many change process decisions require real-time synthesis of information and the anticipation of risks. The folks that I spoke with didn't see AI doing that, at least not today. Of course, this points to the importance of technology in the change management process. Today, we're very focused on AI, but quantum computing is on the horizon. The winners will have a clear plan to anticipate and prepare for future changes. And technologies, particularly those that become embedded in everything the organization does, are also likely to have legal and ethical risks. Management consulting firms, particularly because of their role as trusted advisors for other organizations, will need to have carefully thought through the ethical use of each new technology. And of course, this will also have training implications. All right, finally, management consulting companies, of course, are not evolving by themselves apart from other changes in the market. And so there are now new competitors that are emerging, even some that were perhaps traditional partners, maybe technology suppliers, who are developing their own AI capabilities and who are embedding their own service people in the client organizations of management consulting firms. Then, too, there's the well-publicized competition for specialized resources. And the current economic environment, if we take a look at that, is also one in which, as I said before, there's a lot of uncertainty. Clients are probably going to continue, at least in the near term, to scrutinize consulting spending even more carefully, at least until some of the factors affecting different economies begin to settle down to the new normal. In this environment, management consulting firms are going to have to carefully prioritize their investments. And this includes the critical human capital investments that I've summarized in this talk. And just to throw one more challenge into the mix, the generation that has grown up digitally native with always on internet and digital interaction as the primary form of socialization is now beginning to enter the professional workforce. If Jonathan Haidt is correct, and I think he is, then consulting firms and their clients will face even greater challenges related to their human capital. And so, in this emerging anxious generation environment, I believe that winning firms will actively build tighter relationships with external partner organizations to support functions that are either too costly or evolving too quickly or requiring too much skill diversity to fully deliver with just internal resources. And this will particularly include the human capital management capabilities that I've discussed in this talk. All right, so that's my summary of really prepared comments. And I'd like to transition at this point to questions. And one of the questions that I've gotten is, how does training happen today in consulting firms, and how is that changing? And so I'm going to start with that one. And again, I'll look for comments, questions that you add. And so the short answer to the question is, most firms do have formal training programs that use a combination of face-to-face and virtual instruction. However, consulting is still largely an apprenticeship model where a lot of what is learned happens through on-the-job training and socialization or social learning, which is what we used to call water cooler talk. So informal conversations at various points in time in different places in which war stories, if you will, are shared and lessons are learned that way. And so when change needs to happen, training to support that can largely look like a diffusion process. And so that today, when we, in the absence of more structured training to support change, what happens is the firm has, or maybe intentionally identifies, a few apostles to go and talk to their peers. And the intentionality there is good, but what I would suggest is that more structure and management of the process is going to be required. And some of my comments earlier were alluding to that point. So this is going to include formal training combined with performance evaluation and feedback mechanisms. And ultimately, this is going to require culture change. And the last point I'll make on that is that it isn't always easy to get people who are very smart, who work very hard, and who have a high degree of confidence in their own abilities to engage in changing to a new approach. So that's kind of a challenge before the management consulting firms. I see a question now in the chat. Can you provide some color on what you're seeing if models shift, differences among large, medium, small players in terms of human AI mix? Do you have a perspective on mix shift targets for these segments? So I'm going to interpret this and hopefully get this interpretation correct. If I don't, please feel free to follow up with clarification. But I think the question being asked here is, do I see the mix of consulting firms, the structure of those, meaning the mix between large, medium, and niche or boutique players changing? I think we're going to continue to see the large firms exist. I think what I'm hearing and seeing is that there's going to be a shift in the types of projects that they do. And yes, I do believe that will open the door for competition, particularly competition that is focused on particular segments. So you saw my comments associated with the types of projects that clients are demanding. They want tech solutions. So, don't just come in and tell me what I need to do. Yes, I want those strategic insights. So there's still strategic projects, but they're not going to be as big and they're not going to be probably as frequent, or at least the conversations are going to be smaller and more focused on those strategy insights. And the emphasis is going to shift to help me build solutions. And that is going to provide opportunity, particularly depending on how the big firms respond. That's going to provide opportunity for boutique players in different regions or different industry sectors to respond and better tailor their services to that environment. So I can definitely see the opportunity for the smaller firms to grow in these niche areas that may not be what has traditionally been a big part of some of the big strategy consulting firms' project mix. So great question. Another question, how do you improve the soft skills required to consultants in this new job market? And so I'm going to go back to this is a great question, one that is very near and dear to my heart because of the training that we provide for our students. And I think universally recognized by the folks that I talked with, and certainly my experience as a faculty, is it is challenging to teach the soft skills. And a great deal of that does happen in the professional consulting world through what I talked about as an apprenticeship model. What I think is going to have to happen is that we're going to need to move towards an even greater use of research to identify and help us categorize, quantify those skills. We're going to have to use different models where there's interaction. And by the way, I know at least one firm mentioned doing this where you've got clients in the room. So we do this in the business school where we have students present to clients, but that may not be part of what every professional consulting firm uses. What I'm going to suggest is it's going to become increasingly important, and particularly in these kinds of soft skills. One of the things that consulting companies recognize as important, and I alluded to it in the performance evaluation and performance potential discussion. A lot of time in consulting firms is spent thinking about what is the potential of this person. That is, how far can they go within the firm? Does this person have the skill sets that we think are going to be important at another level, the next level, or the highest levels within the firm? And so part of that is, what is the client presence, if you will? And that is in part a leadership question. How do I project my personal leadership? How do I build? I use this term trusted advisor in talking about the consultant. So you think about a trusted advisor as somebody who's got credibility and, of course, trust. There are specific behaviors that connect with building credibility and building trust. And so the training now, back to where I started, needs to be more formally conscious of what those behaviors are and helping new consultants build those skills from the earliest points in which that, and possibly even ahead of time, meaning before the consultant's even hired. And so there are ways in which I think that's been happening, but it's going to become even more important. So there are companies, Deloitte is one example I'm familiar with, that will have folks who've gone through the analyst role. They will send them to business school with the expectation that the person's coming back, and business school becomes an opportunity then to help build those skills. What are the kinds of, that's an example of saying, even before a person enters the consulting ranks or higher positions within the firm, what kinds of partnerships, what kinds of training opportunities can I, as a consulting firm, invest in, build to help with people's training, with identifying their gaps, and with customizing a plan? By the way, but to be conscious of the fact too that it may lead us to say this person's not going to get to where we need them to be given what we forecast as the mix of skills that we need within our firm. So there's a kind of complex mix of answering that question of soft skills, but I do believe it's possible to train, and I do believe it's important to begin training sooner rather than later. And again, to my last point in my prepared comments around this, the emerging challenges of the anxious generation, that we're going to see this become even more important in the training for folks entering the professional workforce in the years to come. I see another question. Do you foresee the industry downsizing with the growth rate of AI tech implementations? With that said, do you anticipate management consulting to increase, maintain, or decrease in its current compensation ranges? Wow, there's a great question. Reagan likes to get right to the point, I see. And yes, absolutely important here. My reaction would be, I do think there's going to be pressure. There is pressure right now on management consulting firms that may well lead to some downsizing, or at least shifting in the allocation, to my earlier comments, of what projects are done. The firms who are willing to shift their work, willing and able to shift their work from what they've traditionally done to the new services being requested, are going to be those that are going to continue to see growth. We're not going to see firms not need consultants. Again, firms have this challenge of their resource constraint. They don't have the bandwidth in some cases to manage change. They value the insights that consultants bring, who, as I said before, span different industry sectors, that work across countries. And so those insights that consultants can bring are going to continue to be valued in the near term. Now, AI is going to supplement what firms do. AI is going to enable, I think, niche competitors to enter the market. Is there going to be an overall reduction in management consulting spend? It's possible. I think over the long term, maybe more than the short term. I think in the short term, you've got a lot of need. And the biggest challenge is the economic realities that companies are facing today. So I guess my overall reaction is, I don't think we're going to see a decrease in the near term in management consulting demand, possibly in the long term, but we will see a reallocation of what firms are hiring consultants to do. And that's also going to play out in the last part of your question, which was compensation. And so we're going to see a shift, and this is going to create a challenge for consulting firms, because what is going to be valued is valued today, is a certain set of skills. We've all seen the articles on, what's Meta paying to attract talent, as an example, AI talent. And this is just an example, but the point is that that's going to require consulting firms to rethink their compensation packages. And the fact that what's historically been rewarded, as I said, is the ability to sell work, and rewarded means both progression in the firm and ultimately being an equity partner. I think the pressure is going to be on consulting firms to rethink that structure, as they have more technical specialists coming into the firm who may not appropriately be incentivized in the same way or with the same exact measures. Some overlap, but maybe different weighting of those measures. So that's going to challenge the historic distribution of compensation within the management consulting firms. Great question. One more question. One of the challenges I see is how to price the new service and how to manage client expectations of cost decrease while managing work hours for the consultants. That's another good observation, great question. It is the case that consulting firms are rethinking how they deliver and price their services, and in some cases, pricing services based on outcomes, not on the traditional billable hours by billable rates. So we're right at the end of our time today. And before I go, I'd be remiss if I just first didn't thank you for joining us. If you have more questions, please add them to the comments section, and I'll do my best to reply. Please also follow Fuqua on LinkedIn to be alerted to these and other events. I definitely want to thank the 9 management consultants who contributed their insights, my team of experiential learning here within FCCP, my co-director and director of experiential learning, and past team members, particularly the faculty who teach in our programs, students, current and alumni. And I want to give a shout out to the Fuqua staff who've really been supportive of me, including marketing, multimedia, and our center partners. And this is not an exhaustive list. Thank you very much for your time today.